Cool. Welcome, everyone. I'm Drew Wandzilak at Alumni Ventures, and this is another video in our greater kind of video podcast series around the future of the bioeconomy. And I am joined by Adam and Jack, the co-founders of Unicorn Bio. Great to see you guys.
Hi.
Cool. Well, Jack or Adam, do either of you want to, would love to hear an introduction from both of you, kind of hear a little bit more about yourselves. We'll keep it brief, and then either one of you want to kind of share a little bit of the history of Unicorn Bio and where you guys are at now.
Hey, Drew. Thanks for having us. Yeah, so I'm Jack. I'm one of the co-founders of Unicorn Bio. Very quick introduction on me. I started out life as a wannabe chemist, worked in industry, ended up coming over to Europe and the UK where I met Adam, and yeah, getting into Unicorn where we're doing some cool things in biomanufacturing.
So, hi, I'm Adam. So I'll go back to front maybe. I started out life as a scientist, an R&D scientist. I've got a PhD in cancer cell biology. I worked on stem cells before, during, and after my PhD. I jumped towards big industry. I was a tiny cog in a massive machine. I ran away from that, went back to university sector. Did a couple of postdocs, got frustrated with that because the impact on the world just wasn't there for me. Then worked in a couple of startups myself, and then met Jack, and that's kind of how we started off in building Unicorn.
That's awesome. Incredible background, and we'll dive back into that a little bit more later. And admittedly, I kind of invited both of you onto this interview here with very limited information, really, with this concept of we're talking about the future of the bioeconomy, which, if you know anything about the bioeconomy, is just a massive thing to try to talk about in 30 minutes. But that's, I think, a really interesting place to start. So when I say the bioeconomy, I'm curious how that kind of lands with you and what that means to you personally. And is it even the right term? Because I'm coming at this from, not as kind of deeply educated on the space. So when I say bioeconomy, what does that mean to you, and how do you think about that trend, that industry, that market as a whole?
Maybe I can go and then Jack can follow. I think bioeconomy is a good term. To me, it means using biological systems to produce useful things for any number of applications. So my background is cell biology, but mixed with engineering, as in device engineering. So when I think of bioeconomy, I always think cells, no matter what people say. That's just my default go-to. I also think automation as well, because I think it's mad that we think that it's going to be feasible to do this all with human beings. So those two things for me are kind of where a lot of what we're trying to work on comes from. And I'll pass over to Jack. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'll echo Adam's sentiment. Bioeconomy is a cool term. I thought it sounded cool the first time I heard it. I think it's perhaps a bit vague in that it, like you said, it encompasses so much. Like folks who are working on stem cell based therapeutics, all the way to regenerative agriculture, kind of fall under this umbrella term of working in the bioeconomy. So sometimes it can be a bit difficult to know, like Adam said, it means something totally different to him than it does to you, Drew, and than it does to me. My background, like I mentioned, I started out life as a chemist. Whenever I think of economy, I go right back to those big chemical reactors I used to work with, which is just not how most bioproduction works. So everyone probably has a different take on it, but it's quite a cool place to be.
Yeah, of course. And maybe even help contextualize this for our audience who may not be that educated on biology or chemistry or the bioeconomy at all. Automation, cell-based biological systems, it's this massive market. Why is it important? And this might be what drives either of you to keep doing what you're doing, but why should people care about this? Cool, it's automating, it's having these biological systems, really cool in a lab. Why does it matter? And on a global scale or on an economic scale, what's kind of the big need that you guys see that it's important to spend time in this space?
Yeah, maybe I'll start first on this one. So I'll give like the really high level answer, and then Adam will follow, and he'll tell me it's not specific enough. Um, yeah. So I'm cribbing this from someone. Like you see a lot of folks get up on stage on a soapbox and say like the 21st century is the century of biology, and that's really great. But what does it actually mean? I mean, to me, what gets me like really excited about what we do is the fact that in the 21st century, we're actually developing the tools and technologies to engineer or manipulate biological systems to make useful products. Like bare bones, that's kind of the underlying premise for the bioeconomy. So what does that mean? You know, like I mentioned earlier, like a super wide range of things. Like on one end of the spectrum, you have, let's say, stem cell therapeutics, where we as a species are able to engineer living mammalian or human cells and turn them into new types of therapeutics, like to potentially have curative impacts in helping the blind see, the deaf hear, new types of treatment for cancer. I mean, that's pretty cool right off the cuff. The other end of the spectrum, you have folks working in, like, say, the cultivated meat space, where you're trying to grow meat from cells in a factory as opposed to needing to raise animals to get meat. And really, there's a lot of cool projects out there that are going to have impacts in human health, in sustainability, and ultimately, not to sound cheesy, but they're going to try and reshape the world that we live in the next few decades. So I think that's pretty cool.
Good answer, Jack. I like it.
Fair shot, yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is, from my personal perspective, I'll take a slightly different take on it. I'm not sure who said it, but you don't get to the LED by iterating on the candle. It's just a premise of what I like. So for some of these problem spaces, we're taking technology stacks from historically different places and bringing them into another industry, if you like. And that's where all the disruption tends to happen. We don't notice it, but all of a sudden it's there. So a lot of things I'm really hopeful for, bioeconomy wise, that we're effectively going to reshape other industries. Now, the incumbents might not like that. You've Nokia's, your Polaroids and all the rest of it, your Netflixes, all of those industries initially go, oh no, we're not going to do it like this. But yeah, as Jack mentioned, especially with engineering biology, and for me, there's a tack onto that as automation, because if we need to engineer the biology and automate it to scale it, because production is a problem. It's all well and good showing things in an academic lab at small scales. You need to have real impact. You need to be able to manufacture it across, whatever it is you're doing, you're going to have to make a lot of it, most likely, to have a large impact. That's, for me, why the two bits go together. But yeah, so it's trying to do new things in potentially existing industries. So cell therapy would be a replacement for taking conventional drugs. If we can reproducibly produce these at scale and treat tens of thousands of people, then that's going to be quite a transformative difference than giving people a pill and asking them to take that. So these are the kind of things that excite me about the bioeconomy.
Incredible. And Adam, you mentioned kind of the term scale a bunch, and I think that's really the difference. I mean, for people understanding, especially stuff in hard sciences, in biology, in chemistry, it's how can you get this out of the lab and, like, maybe it works, right? But the next big breakthrough, I think, to have any sort of world-changing effort is the scale, right? How much can you automate? How much can you scale? What are the challenges in your mind? And maybe this is a foray into describing Unicorn a little bit more, but, like, when you think about scalability within this realm, what does that mean? And, like, is there a common thread of kind of barriers or challenges across this industry to scale that you keep seeing and are kind of what's hindering, this from having those, like, cell-based therapeutics that could be world changing if they could get to the right scale?
For me, there's a bunch of things. I'm actually going to say scale is one big challenge, and then there's a few others as well. There's logistics, there's does the thing actually work? So if you show the thing actually works, then you've got a scaling problem, because you then need to do things like clinical trials and have enough material to test on that. And we do that via human labor, but that's humans are wonderful. Obviously, we're all great, but we're also not very reproducible in the way that science is kind of a bit artisanal and a bit, if you come into our lab, you'll see people. It's the classic on the news picture of a person with a pipette holding liquid that puts things between different containers. That's not the most accurate way to do things. So you want machines that automate and are more reproducible. And if you do that at the same time and you apply that at scale, then you have something you can then treat lots of people with if it's a therapeutic. If it's a food product, again, maybe the reproducibility doesn't matter as much, but you're still going to need to scale it. Yeah, that's my sort of take on it. I'm not sure I answered the question, but I'll pass it over to Jack and see what he says.
Yeah. Oh no, this is great. I'm loving the click-clack dynamic. I'm going to answer the question with an anecdote. Adam puts up with my anecdotes all the time, so hopefully you don't mind, Drew. So like we're as a company, Unicorn, we're based in Sheffield in the United Kingdom, and I'm an American originally. Like I'm from the US, and the only thing I knew about Sheffield is that steel came from here. Turns out it's actually a lovely city full of lovely people. But like, yeah, just down the road from us, there's a museum about the industrial history of Sheffield, and it's where something called the Bessemer process was invented. And the Bessemer process is it's a metallurgical process to basically mass produce steel. And it just blows my mind that, like, this gentleman, Mr. Bessemer, back in the mid-19th century, came in, found a really interesting market, the steel market, with very manual, human labor-driven production methods, and a real impact that could be made if you could scale it up. Steel makes skyscrapers, steel makes boats. I kind of ask the question, how do we take what a human being does, automate it, and then apply it at scale? So as like a history buff, I am tickled pink by the fact that, Adam and all the wonderful people at Unicorn, like, we're still asking the same question like 200 years later. I think it's quite cool. But fundamentally, that's it. That's the question. Like, you can have the greatest product on planet Earth. It could be steel, it could be a stem cell therapy, it could be a semiconductor, it could be a polio vaccine, it could be an automobile. But if you don't have a way to mass produce it, you just have a really interesting project and not an industry. So yeah, I'd say that's the real challenge in the bioeconomy writ large right now is how can you make it scalable? How can you actually take the interesting science, put it inside industrialized production processes and machines, and have something that can crank out high quality products and therapies at affordable price points?
Maybe.
And within that, I mean, because that market is so broad, there's rarely like a silver bullet that can scale for everything.
Yeah.
I imagine that's not necessarily the case here. Are there kind of practices or technologies that can apply across the verticals that the bioeconomy touches that solve that issue of scaling? And if not, is there kind of common bottlenecks that, people that are working on therapeutics versus working on cultivated meat experience this, similar issues in scaling? And how do you guys think about that? And again, maybe it's a plug for Unicorn, but curious your thoughts around that.
Maybe I can go. The answer is maybe is the answer, which is not an answer at all. So again, thinking about cells, there's some great technology stacks that we use to produce recombinant proteins and things like this. And they've taken a technology that was kind of more used for the fermentation industry, and they've evolved it to be able to use to produce biopharmaceuticals. And that's fine, and that's good, and I want that to continue. But some of this, then, it's kind of that iterating on the candle idea. Sometimes you're not going to get the LED. So we do have some ways to scale these up. Otherwise, we wouldn't have vaccines and things like that. The problem kind of becomes when the cell is the product. a lot of without going too much into cell biology, usually the vaccine or the recombinant protein is a byproduct of the cell. Whereas if you want the cell to be the product, there isn't as many, in my opinion, technology stacks, and that's why we work on the approach we do, that are able to scale up the production of a cell, because what we're trying to do is fit the biology into pre-existing engineering rather than building new engineering around the biology. And that's kind of what we do at Unicorn. And that's the thesis, at least. One of the theses is to take kind of stuff we already know how to do and scale it out rather than scale it up, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I should stop going after Adam because I'm really having to rack my brains to come up with something cool to say. No, I mean, like, it's just to echo the sentiment, like, there's no one silver bullet that will solve every single problem in the bioeconomy. Like Adam was saying, the tech that works okay for like making vaccines today just isn't suitable for making cultivated meat or stem cell therapies, which is why we exist. Vice versa. The first range of machines and technologies that Unicorn is making is going to be useful, but it's probably not going to solve every single problem out there. It's just, the bioeconomy is so big that there's a lot of problems that need to be solved, and frankly, a lot of opportunity for new businesses to get out there and solve those problems.
Yeah, just going one more comment back off what Jack said. The thing with biology, if you think of it, it's not that unsurprising. Biology is pretty diverse, although, okay, right, we're all carbon-based life forms. We all have, DNA and things like that. But when you start to grow, it's unsensible to think that, I don't know, a mushroom is going to grow in the same way as a human cell, for example. So when you come to actually, an example of this is, so for some fermentation systems, for example, they need cooling, not heating, because they get too hot. Whereas the mammalian cells that we work, we need to heat them. So that directly impacts how you design the engineering, just from a really fundamental level. So yeah, I don't think there's no single technology that will solve all these. There's more likely going to be sort of an array of them. Some of the technology already exists from fermentation industry, the beer industry, and that's the approach you want to take. Big tanks, huge scale, massive factories, probably with a wind farm on the side and solar panels and the rest of it to make it sustainable. But some of them are going to have to think. You're going to have to think in a sort of slightly different way to get to that scale, so that you can have the impact. So yeah, that's how I would follow on from what Jack said.
Oh, that was incredibly helpful. And then changing gears a little bit, I'm curious, and we can start with Jack because he's got to keep following up Adam.
Sorry.
It's easy to get into these kind of bubbles of education, understanding, especially in highly technical roles, highly technical businesses. What are some things that you've noticed when talking to people outside of Unicorn Bio, outside of the bioeconomy or a biology or chemistry background, that either frustrates you or like you want to grab them and be like, no, that's not how this works? Or just, some feelings of like, oh, I feel like people aren't as educated on this specific kind of angle of the industry that would be really important if people knew more about.
So all right, great seeing going first this time, because I can actually I'll tell you how I got into cell biology. So as a wee bit of background on me, I actually started out my life as a cook. Like, I worked in kitchens, I loved doing it, and kind of like through that I got interested in science of food. That led me to chemistry, and then ultimately down kind of the career path I'm on. And I've always tried to go after what I thought were the most interesting problems. And so after a few years of working, I landed at cell biology as a space where, like Adam said, you could have the most impact because it's really early from a technological development. And quite literally, stem cell therapies have the potential to treat cancer and to develop treatments for heart failure or blindness. Like, to me, like, I don't even need to justify why that's cool. Like, that's just so impactful, let alone any of the sustainability efforts. And then when I first started working with cell biology, I was in for like the rudest awakening of my life. It turns out biology is extremely complex, extremely nuanced, and when you start talking about things like stem cells that most people have kind of, maybe they've seen this in like a New York Times article once, that it's easy to say, oh, it's that sciencey thing. Like the reality is stem cells are extremely complex, extremely exciting, and also extremely different than other types of biology out there. Like the number one problem I'll speak for Unicorn C, like when we go and talk with folks, is that, you know, we talk about the bioeconomy and we talk about scale up as if it's this monolithic thing, it's this one thing. And sometimes you do just want to like, wave your hand and say, no, stop. Like you can't try and fit a square peg into a round hole. Like this isn't Apollo 13. Biology doesn't work like that. Yeah, so I think that's just like it's been my biggest rude awakening. Like when I started working, it's like, what do you mean biology isn't automated and we don't understand how like the building blocks all work? I thought this was the case. So like I hope, if anyone's not watching this on TikTok and they paid attention this far, that like the take home message is that biology is really cool, but it's really diverse and you gotta have different techniques and technologies to make different things.
Very good, Jack. Mine's is, I suppose, yeah, where'd you start? So there's a thing when we were on, me and Jack participated on Entrepreneur First, and when we were on Entrepreneur First, they would say a lot about the curse of knowledge. Once you know, and it's actually difficult and this is true of scientists in academia or that have started up on their own or spinning out companies. You just take for granted some of the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis. And then when you bring people into the world, they're like, oh, a cell doesn't look like a fried egg. It looks completely different than a fried egg when you look at it down a microscope. And you're like, yes. How did you not know? Well, of course you didn't know. So for me, yeah, Jack's point about stem cells, there are different types of stem cells. They're not all, I think it's good. We're moving away from the idea that there's just embryonic stem cells. When you say the word embryonic stem cells, people think negative, there's ethical considerations, stuff like that. And people started to realize actually there's different types of stem cells. So when I have conversations outside it, 10 years ago when I had those conversations, everyone thought embryonic, which means babies. And the source is then questionable, which it isn't, and I won't have a debate about that. But they've moved on from that, and now they know there's different types of stem cells. Internally, there's an even different thing within science. So we have an interesting mix of scientists and engineers, and the engineers see biology as a bit of a social science sometimes, whereas because they're like, what do you mean there's laws and physics, and the biologists will throw their hands up and go, yeah, we know how to get it from A to B, but we don't really we don't fully understand how we've got it from A to B. We've just figured out a way to do it. So there's within sort of even science and engineering, the interesting thing I see when I talk outside of, let's call it a cell biology domain, what we're trying to do also at Unicorn is bring engineers from different like classical industries into stem cell biology. And I think that's part of like a strength of us. So on one hand, you've got the outside people, the public that are, like Jack said, might have read a New York Times article, but we also have it within the ecosystem that sometimes we're not even like speaking the same language to each other because the technology stacks and everything are quite different because they have to be, things like that.
No, that was great. I mean, for both of you, I think really interesting around the stem cells and even just speaking the same language. I think within that realm of like people would think about research and academia and science as like, oh, it's all the same language and maybe I don't know enough about it, but definitely very different. Great. And my last question, we're keeping this brief. My last question is really around if you guys weren't building Unicorn Bio, what would you want to be doing, or what would you feel would be kind of your other calling? Obviously, that's probably not a lot of brain space spent on that. Knowing the founder life, but what would be kind of the second thing if you couldn't work on Unicorn anymore? where would you spend your time? We can start with Jack,
So,
if that's helpful.
yeah, you got to forgive me. Sorry,
Start with
I
you.
I was laughing because like I think it was a couple of weeks back, like we were just having a chat like in the office, and someone asked this question. It was like, Adam, Jack, what would you guys do if you weren't doing Unicorn? And like without even thinking, Adam was just like starting another biotechnology company, building bioproduction systems. Like I wish I had that level of conviction in my career path. No, yeah, I mean, I honestly, if it wasn't working on Unicorn as right now, I'd probably maybe take a month off, have a holiday, go to the beach, and probably come back in and go into another venture. See if Adam wanted to have another go with me. Maybe we can still be friends after this. No.
Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that. For me, I use this quote. I don't know if I've stolen it from somebody else. Maybe I have, but believe it or not, frustration gives me a lot of fuel. So I'm 15 years. I've been doing stuff like this in labs, R&D positions, stuff like that. And you just look at it and you're like, why is no one doing this? And there's only two reasons. Either it's a mad idea and will never work, or it's a huge idea and will have massive impact and everyone's just ignored a blindingly obvious thing. I'm hoping for us it's the latter, obviously. For me, one of the things I do in my spare time is I try to help support other people's startup. So maybe I would do that a bit more full time. Mainly because I have nothing against Oxford and Cambridge, but I think there's a world outside of it that there's talent is distributed quite widely. I think societies in every country around the world they hone in on certain regions, and there's really innovative people that don't necessarily live in those regions and don't want to. So I'd like to see more distribution of things like that. So helping other people start up might be something. And the only other thing is something to do with healthcare management. The UK, on a completely different subject, the UK healthcare system could be improved, and I think there is, although ML and AI is a buzzword, I think there's lots of opportunities to improve the patient pathway, because although we talk about scale up, it's part of a complete path. You need to be able to make enough of the stuff, and then you need to treat a number of people. Then you have to have somebody to treat the people. How are they going to deliver the treatment? You have to have a joined up strategy for the whole lot. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. Like, I love technology, but if it's not as part of the entire infrastructure, then that also doesn't matter as well. So I'd probably do something in that space. So helping other founders, or something in another point in the kind of translation of anything that will make a difference to people on planet Earth would be my thing.
Incredible. Thank you both for taking the time to do this. It wasn't so bad, right? It was pretty painless, and I think we had fun doing it. Definitely, there's a part two somewhere years in the future, and we'll get an update on how you guys are doing and the market and everything. This was fantastic. Thank you both for joining today.
No problem.